May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So growing up in Ohio, I never really thought much about water or not having enough water. Things always seemed green. I don't ever remember anybody talking about a drought. Water was always seen pretty much as a good thing, unless we got a lot of rain and the Ohio River would start to rise and start to flood out from its banks. And then occasionally water was not such a good thing. And I didn't really understand about deserts until I started my cross-country bike trip from Anaheim to Manhattan. And I had only seen, Lawrence of Arabia, TV, shifting sand kind of desert. And I also had no idea what it actually felt like to be out on one's bicycle in the middle of the day when it was 125 degrees outside. So I got a very quick education in the desert in the first few days of those rides. And most of the time when we think about water as something positive, something life-giving, something necessary to us. And we think of deserts as a place of desolation, of loneliness, of death, of a place that we really don't want to find ourselves. But it's really interesting because the Bible doesn't always talk about water and the desert in those particular ways. We heard a little bit this morning from the book of Genesis with Noah. Noah and the flood. Water was not a good thing. Water destroyed the earth. Water destroyed life. And how long was Noah and his family and the animals supposedly on the ark? 40 days and 40 nights. When Abraham drove Hagar and her son Ishmael out into the desert, Hagar cries out to God, "Are we here just to die?" And she casts her child under a bush and sits down and waits for death. But then God comes back and says to her, "Pick up your child." And she's able to continue on in the desert. The Israelites wandered in the desert. And one of the first things they did, they cried out to God, "God, why did you bring us here to kill us with thirst?" And what does Moses do? He takes his staff, he strikes the rock, and water flows to take care of the people. So we have all these sort of conflicting images back and forth of water as positive and life-giving, or water as death-dealing, in fact. There's also another wonderful water story in the book of Jonah, when God says to Jonah, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim that it's going to be destroyed." And Jonah thinks he can hide from God. He hops passage on a ship. Well, God catches up with Jonah, sends a huge storm, and the boat is breaking up, and the sailors are saying, "Whose God is angry at us? It must be somebody." And Jonah finally puts up his hand and says, "Throw me overboard, it'll all be good." And sure enough, they grab Jonah, they pitch him overboard, and that's the end of the storm. And you know what happens to Jonah. But even once we reach the New Testament, we have stories of water, of tempests, of Jesus calming the sea. There's this interplay with water and desolation and desert, back and forth and back and forth. And we hear about it this morning in our gospel lesson. But as Jesus did with parables, this particular story of the baptism of Jesus gives us some interesting turns on our perception usually of water and of desert. Because our baptismal theology teaches us that when we are baptized, we die to our old selves. Our old selves are killed, if you will, in baptism. And something new is born in those holy waters of baptism. And there cannot be anything new until that which was old has perished by the water of baptism. And so literally, even in Jesus, something needed to die in those waters of baptism for him to be prepared to go forth for his ministry, for his teaching, his preaching, his apostles. Everything else came following those waters of baptism. And Mark tells us that Jesus just doesn't sort of stroll out into the desert. Jesus is driven into the desert. There's no choice there. And yet in the midst of those temptations, Jesus does not find death in the desert. Jesus actually finds life and strength and commitment to the journey, a knowledge of the possibilities. And so in that case, the desert actually becomes a place of newness, a place of new life, a place of new possibilities. That which we always associate with desolation and death, in this case really isn't. It's what Jesus has to do, the place he has to be for him to find the life and the courage to go forth into his ministry. And how long was Jesus in the desert? 40 days. Funny how that is. 40 days, 40 years. 40 is one of those biblical numbers that you know comes back over and over and over again. And we started Lent on Wednesday, and how long is Lent? 40 days. So Jesus found life in the desert. Jesus found courage. Jesus found the journey that he needed to take in a place that would normally be a place of desolation. And over the years, I think Lent has also gotten this bad rap of being the season of desolation. You know, we're supposed to feel bad during Lent. Somehow that's supposed to cleanse us and purify us and make us better, more holy people if we feel really bad. And I remember Good Fridays when I was a kid, and it would be sunny and bright outside and like 75 degrees, and that just seemed wrong because it should be raining on Good Friday. But Lent is really not a season of wandering in the desert of desolation, of wandering in the desert of death. Lent is really the 40 days that we spend wandering in the desert that creates life, that creates possibilities, that causes something new to grow and spring within us, causes new growth and new possibilities. And we see it here, right where we live. Because I've been here almost 3 years. I have never seen California green until now. The last 2 years we just did not have enough rain. And the hills were brown all winter long until this year. And we've had just that little bit of rain. And our hills, I'm not going to call them verdant, but our hills are green and flowering and beautiful. And the places that we call the desert and the places where we see so little life are now green with life and green with possibilities. So as we begin our Lenten journey together, live into your desert. Find the places where there's life waiting for you, where there's something new waiting to spring forth, waiting to grow, waiting to show you the possibilities of God. Amen.